What if the British fought in the Vietnam War? While the US was busy dropping tons of bombs in Vietnam, hoping for a swift victory, Britain was just sitting back and watching. But what if they had decided to get involved? Vietnam, which was once under French rule, waged a long and hard-fought battle for independence, ultimately triumphing over the French at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Following this victory, the Geneva Accords temporarily split Vietnam along the 17th parallel. North Vietnam, a communist regime led by Ho Chi Minh, receiving support from China and the Soviet Union. South Vietnam, an anti-communist government backed by the United States and its allies. The plan was to hold elections in 1956 to reunite the country. But the South, with U.S. backing, opted out, fearing a communist victory. The U.S. viewed Vietnam not just as a local conflict, but as part of a larger global battle. The domino theory suggested that if Vietnam fell, the rest of Southeast Asia would follow suit. Despite having overwhelming military might, the US and South Vietnam struggled to win over the Vietnamese people. So, what went wrong? The Vietnamese viewed their struggle as a fight against foreign domination, much like they had done against the French and Japanese before. On top of that, the Saigon regime was quite unpopular, perceived as elitist, repressive, and heavily supported by foreign powers. By the 1960s, Britain had lost its status as the dominant imperial power it once was before World War II. The British Empire was gradually falling apart, granting independence to numerous colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. The economy was in a delicate state, still trying to bounce back from the war, dealing with debt, and facing ongoing balance of payments issues. Consequently, during the Vietnam War, approximately 1955-1975, Britain adopted a stance of non-intervention, which was a careful blend of diplomacy, self-interest, and restraint. But what if they had decided to get involved? Britain's experience in Malaya from 1948 to 1960, which is often seen as a successful counterinsurgency, might have led to more disciplined and patient tactics. Rather than relying on blanket bombing and counting bodies, British officers likely advocated for a hearts and minds strategy, focusing on building local trust, gathering intelligence, and isolating insurgents. This approach could have helped avoid some of the major blunders made by the Americans, such as indiscriminate bombing and alienating civilians. Fun fact: British officials and military experts discreetly shared their insights with the US on counterinsurgency strategies, frequently drawing parallels to Malaya. Interestingly, while US analysts took a close look at Britain's success during the Malayan emergency, they overlooked many of the subtle political and social tactics that played a crucial role. But what if things were different and the British joined the war? Would it have tilted the outcome of the war? Britain's anti-war sentiment in the 1960s was quite pronounced, especially during a time when the empire was in decline. The involvement in Vietnam could have stirred up tensions among the British public, particularly if conscription or increased taxes were on the horizon. Consequently, the UK pushed back against US pressure to send combat troops or provide substantial material support, opting instead to offer political backing for US efforts to contain communism. As the co-chair of the Geneva Conference back in 1954, Britain played a key role in helping to establish the initial peace between France and Vietnam. Getting involved in the war would mean compromising its position as a neutral mediator. Vietnam had just come out of nearly 70 years under French colonial rule, a time marked by forced labor, land grabs, censorship, and harsh repression. The Vietnamese fought fiercely for their independence, first against the French, then the Japanese, and once more against the French after World War II. By the 1950s and 60s, many Vietnamese saw any Western power as an occupying force, whether it was the French, Americans, or even the British in a hypothetical scenario. Even if Britain had better strategies or intentions, many Vietnamese would probably still associate them with their colonial oppressors. For many Vietnamese, the British colonial history, in places like India and Burma, has left a lasting mark, shaping their views, creating skepticism, and ultimately making it harder to win their trust and affection. If the British had entered the war, many Vietnamese from the north would have likely accused Britain of attempting to re-establish its colonial influence in Southeast Asia. They would have framed the conflict even more emphatically as a struggle for national liberation, viewing it as a battle between communism and capitalism. From the perspective of Southern Vietnamese, skepticism would probably prevail, as they would remember Britain's support for French colonialism after World War II. To many Vietnamese, Britain would have seemed just another foreign power in a long history of colonizers, more familiar than the Americans, but certainly not more welcome. Their colonial history would have clouded perceptions, eroded trust, and ultimately hindered any efforts to win hearts and minds. The key takeaway here is that while history doesn't exactly repeat itself, it certainly has a way of echoing. We see the same patterns of failed interventions cropping up when those in power fail to learn from what's come before. Wars are seldom just about military might. Factors like culture, nationalism, and legitimacy often hold more weight than sheer firepower. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more historical contents.